Before we begin, thank you very much to Joe T for joining the Patreon campaign. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the support. I've got a lot in the queue right now for shoutouts, and they keep coming, and I appreciate that greatly. I don't know if you people are trying to start a new streak, or if it's just, the holidays and you're feeling generous. Either way, I do appreciate it greatly. Thank you for allowing me to continue doing this nonsense for everybody. We have something fun to talk about today. So, with the age of the primes fully revealed, now the official confirmation that they are using Star Convoy as the 13th prime. This changes a lot of things. It changes a lot of things, and I have been thinking about this what does this mean for the Transformer mythos and story overall? And I predicted a few things. I'm happy about that. But since I've been thinking about it so much, I've come up with so much that this means. Like, having Star Convoy as one of the 13, there's ramifications here. There are very big ramifications, so that we are going to get to that today. So it's kind of half history lesson, half manic, frantic fanfic writing. So you'll excuse me if I just kind of go off the rails for a little bit. Hopefully it'll be a fun tangent, though. So yeah, this all started with this image. So when we first saw the side of Megatronus's box, we saw, statues of the primes, but one in particular looked very familiar. It's Star Convoy, but with a Power Master Optimus Prime chest. I'm not sure why the artwork reflects that instead of, the actual traditional chest. No clue. But the rest of the body, unmistakable Star Convoy, which started percolating the fanfic writer in my brain, So what happens if, Star Convoy is the result of G1 Optimus Prime regaining his divinity after he cast it off and chose to leave the 13 to become a normal Cybertronian? That's where it kind of kicked off, because that makes sense. It makes sense that G1 Optimus Prime's most powerful form, Star Convoy, is actually the result of him gaining the most powerful MacGuffin in G1 and then returning to being a prime. Also, before anyone calls me out on that, stop it with the alternity. Alternity characters are the amalgamation of every incarnation of every character any one particular character across the multiverse. G1 Optimus Prime, as we know him, is a molecule in Alternity Convoy. So no one call me out for saying it's, this is his most powerful form. It's technically not him. It's technically a whole new prime made up of a lot of other primes simultaneously. In that sense, Alternity Prime is also the most powerful form of Animated Prime and RID 2001 Prime. So we're going to exclude him from the discussion. For all intents and purposes, Star Convoy is the most powerful form of G1 Optimus Prime. It's the final form he had before fiction in Japan kind of ended for G1. They did technically continue when G2 became a thing, but the start of G2 is really vague, because Optimus and Megatron reappear in their G2 forms with no real explanation for how Megatron survived and how Optimus Prime is no longer in his star form. And they're noticeably not nearly as powerful as they were in their previous iterations. So where G2 picks up in the story is actually not entirely, concrete. There's a lot of hand waving and fanficking you have to do to connect those together, which we can do, but we can wait for that. For starters, I think we need a little bit of a history lesson. So, what is the Zodiac? So, according to Japanese G1 fiction, the Zodiac is the most powerful energy source in the universe, supposedly the source of all life. There's no real confirmation that that's what it is. That feels more like a hearsay thing, but needless to say, it's incredibly powerful. If it looks familiar, it's because it's that thing Diatlos was holding in the 40th anniversary trigger animation we saw a few months back. So, yeah, it's a pretty prominent thing in a very brief period of Generation 1. It's the most powerful MacGuffin in G1, to be sure. So, here's your history lesson as quick as I can create it. In Transformers Zone, this guy, Violin Jaeger, is after the Zodiac that is located somewhere on Earth, and he has joined the Decepticons and empowered a bunch of combiners and city formers to be his generals in order to battle the Autobots and hunt for the Zodiac. They find it, but it's the Autobots who ultimately claim it and power it back up with something called Energon Z, because it's not enough to introduce one new energy MacGuffin, they had to introduce two. Needless to say, that's what empowered the Zodiac back to its full strength. That empowered Diatlos and his crew to be able to combine and deliver enormous amounts of firepower and strength that lets them destroy all the generals. And once they're all destroyed, Violin Jaeger, who, by the way, despite appearances, does have a transformation. It's 3 insect-like creatures he turns into. So he technically does transform, but this is also Violin Jaeger in his final true form, as this massive dark energy phoenix with a Ghost Rider complex. And then Big Powered ends up destroying them anyway. You will notice a theme of, from here on out, Japanese fiction gets rid of its problems by combining everyone in vehicle mode and shooting them a lot. It just becomes a running thing from here on out. But point being, that's how Zone's battle ends. But once Violent Jaeger is out of the way, this guy shows up. Unicron off-wish here is called Dark Nova. Again, Decepticon aligned, apparently mechanical this time, and yeah, he does have a lot of strong vibes of Unicron to him. So much so that even the Autobots on board, in this fiction, decide this is too much for us. No matter how powerful the Zodiac made us, we need something here. So, Sky Gary, can you go find Optimus Prime's body, and you and Grandis are responsible for, bringing him back to life. Here, just drop the Zodiac in his chest, that should work. And it does work. It works well enough to upgrade him into the Star Convoy body that we are talking about today. Not to be one-upped, and really showing his Unicron, Dark Nova finds Galvatron's frozen remains in the Arctic, and revives him and upgrades him into Super Megatron. I don't know why I doubled up the image here, but there we go. And the Battle Stars, that being Star Convoy, Sky Gary, and Grandis, combine and shoot him a lot. Like I said, this is how they solve problems now. And that's what they have to do in order to defeat Super Megatron. Not satisfied with this result, Dark Nova decides to join the fight himself, and then upgraded Megatron again into Ultra Megatron. And this is an even harder battle. Gets harder when Dark Nova just decides to go, I've watched Dragon Ball Z, and fusion dances with Megatron to become Star Giant. This is essentially the final major villain in Generation 1. In order to destroy him, they cannot do it from the outside. You can see how big he is with Sky Gary there in the background. So they do the Unicron thing. They go inside of him and destroy him from within, battling his internal defenses. The story essentially does kind of just rip off how they dealt with Unicron in the movie. They just kind of run that story back to the point where the only thing that really survives is the head, which does contain the remains of Ultra Megatron, meaning Megatron survived the encounter. Thus, the battle between Convoy and Megatron may continue someday. But as we said, all the stories following this aren't really, solidly connected. Technically, Takara will tell you the G2 manga takes place after this. Unfortunately, like I said, there is no explanation for how Megatron was restored in those books, nor is there an explanation for why Convoy gave up so much power to be reduced down to just a normal-size Earth truck again. That's essentially the final major story of Generation 1. There is Operation Combination, which is just to sell a bunch of repaint combiners, but for the most part, that's where G1 officially ends. Everything else has been tacked on after the fact in a very like staple and glue kind of way, just barely holding itself together. So I kind of view those all as splinter realities. There is no solid continuation from Battlestars and Operation Combination. There is just extra stories that could be a continuation. So, no real, like, solid basis here. But that said, where does this whole new take on Star Convoy kind of leave everything in Transformers? Well, for starters, it's a final definitive answer to who the 13th Prime is. A lot of fictions keep him vague intentionally. They want one to be a mystery, his name is lost to time, etc. In the aligned continuity, they told you, like, hard and firm, that this is Optimus Prime. Don't take that out of context. Don't. They tell you straight up Optimus Prime is the 13th Prime. And through the traditional way of he gives up his divinity to become a normal Transformer after the 13 had a falling out. And through the fiction of the Primes, that kind of makes sense because he is supposed to be like the Arisen. He is supposed to be the uniter, the one who brought them together by being the first one to greet the others. Big important thing. Okay, so yeah, it makes sense that this might actually be the prototype for Optimus Prime. All right, I will give you that. But it does mean that like there is official canonical source based in G1, because remember, Generations is largely G1 based. And then they tack into like the occasional fiction. It's technically a splinter universe, but you get my picture. It does tell us, yeah, Optimus Prime is the 13th. And that means because we're using Optimus Prime's final G1 body as the 13th, as part of the 13, that means we've added one more of the 13 to the original G1 fiction. And this is not the first time we've done it. Alpha Trion is the obvious one. We know him. But that also means this guy, Prima. So in Five Faces of Darkness, we see the flashback showing the origins of Transformers, and this is the first one to rise up against the Quintessons. As such, in the modern era, this design is known as G1 Prima. We've retroactively gone back and decided this is the first Prime in the G1 fiction. That's why the head design here is the one used on the modern toy rather than the aligned version of the head sculpt. It's an amalgamation of the two. Frankly, I personally really like it. I think it's a really good mix. It's interesting. Point being, that gives us 3 of the original Primes in Generation 1. Or maybe even more than that. If you follow by the Marvel comics, if you account for the Marvel comics as well, there's a completely different character identified as Prima. Again, originally nameless, retroactively titled, but we also have Macadam in the Marvel universe, meaning that's Alchemist Prime. So there's technically 4 that we can place in G1, which means there is potential for all of them to fit somewhere in the G1 mythos, because of course the whole point of the Primes is to explain all the various iterations and forms a Transformer can take. The females, the tiny bots, the beast formers, the combiners, etc. So there's room in there. There's potentially room in there. It just might be that they came about in G1 in a different way than they did later on. Point being, it's expanding the old fiction. It also lets us power scale them. Now that we have like this kind of amalgamation of universes going on here, we can kind of tell how powerful the Primes are. In some fictions, they're just Transformers who came first, and in others, they are literally demigods. They are, in any fiction, they are generally considered to be incredibly powerful Transformers. But in the G1 fiction, we can now scale them. If you follow the progression of power levels from Rodimus to Fort Max to God Jinrai, Victory Saber, Atlas, you can follow a trail of power scaling, power creeping stronger and stronger. Like you keep in mind, Atlas is a character who could slash a powered up combiner in half and destroy them in one shot. So that's how much more powerful they have gotten. On top of the fact that they stood against universal threats like Violent Jaeger, and then later on Star Convoy standing up against Dark Nova and Ultra Megatron, which again, that's a pretty big feat of strength considering we are comparing Dark Nova to Unicron at this point. So you start to get an idea of just how powerful a Prime really is. You know, if Dark Nova is comparable to Unicron, Optimus as Star Convoy can stand up to him without just busting out the Matrix and blowing him up. That's significant. That tells you something. And speaking of, now we have to figure out Dark Nova. Now that we have like a power scale for Generation 1 a little bit, thanks to this, what is his deal? So Dark Nova has no definitive written origin. Again, just tacked on, stapled in material. But there's no definitive origin for him. Now he's a mechanical being, so someone had to build him. But he's comparable to Unicron, you know, like your god, like your god of chaos and entropy. So if we're doing the 13 in G1, if that exists, then Primus himself can exist as well. You know, you're mixing some mythos here, I will admit. But it raises this point. Who created something that can stand up to a demigod? Who created a being like Dark Nova that can not only stand up to a demigod, but can create other minions that can stand up to demigods? Because Super and Ultra Megatron are depicted far stronger than Galvatron ever was. So in ways, he's more powerful than Unicron. So now what do you do? Like, now I'm super curious about Dark Nova, and it's a character you're probably never going to see anyone touch again because he's so obscure. It makes me think about that. It does make me think about, Primus and Unicron. Is there actually room in the universe for other godlike entities that are actually capable of producing something on the level of Dark Nova? I know in G1 cartoon fiction, which we're kind of following here, okay, Unicron is the creation of, Primacron, or this little, basically, this little, gremlin man that's just angry at the universe. Okay, I get that. But something created someone stronger. And it's not him, because there's no fiction connecting him to Dark Nova. Again, no explanation. So where did he come from? Again, I'm looking at beings more powerful than Unicron and Primus, possibly being part of G1's universe and never having tapped that. That gives you so much room for growth in G1 and just growing the scale of how big the battles and threats can be. And I like that idea. And then I start thinking about the Zodiac itself. Okay. When it gets stuffed into Optimus Prime, it turns him into Star Convoy. In this new iteration, in the new canon, that means it brings him back to divinity and restores his body that he had when he was part of the 13. That's already really cool. However, now we wonder what the Zodiac is. Now, I don't believe the whole it's the source of all life in the universe thing. That's always treated as hearsay. However, this really got me thinking. Follow me on this. This is crazy fanfic territory right now, okay? So, imagine, if you will, Optimus Prime, as the 13th Prime, no longer wishes to be part of this whole divinity thing, casts the divinity off and rejoins the Well of All Sparks to be born again as just a normal transformer. If we're following real-world energy rules and physics, energy cannot be destroyed, it can only be redistributed and dispersed. Which means if he gives off that much energy, it has to go somewhere. You give off all of this divine power, you don't just throw it in the recycle bin and right-click and empty. No, it has to go somewhere. So what if the Zodiac, which has no clear origin, what if this really is something that coalesced back into the orb that you see here and ends up on Earth? Because we know that's where it was hidden. That's why Violent Jaeger came to Earth in the first place. Does that explain why Transformers end up on Earth all the time? Because there is the divinity of a Prime rooted in there and creating the life on the planet. And speaking of that possibility, I did a little bit of research. So, scientists think that human life, or what we can call human life, what would eventually become humans, first evolved on this planet somewhere between roughly 3 and 4 million years ago. What else happened 4 million years ago in Transformers lore? Like I said, wild fanfic theory, but let me have fun. I'm cooking here. The Autobots crash land on Earth. You know, if the Zodiac is part of Earth, if it is already there, there's might be something that had actually pulled the Transformers to that planet. You might even explain why Skyfire in G1 ended up on Earth, because there's something there that is so powerful it just instinctively draws Cybertronians to it. If Prime lands on Earth, if that re-triggers the Zodiac in some way, maybe that's what sparks the evolution of humanity in the first place. Maybe that's why Optimus Prime loves humanity so much. He might not even realize that he's connected to it. Again, wild fanfic theory. But doesn't it connect so many freaking dots? I love it. I love this idea. It's kooky and crazy, and no fiction is ever going to touch it. It's up to me, YouTube Daily Transformer Schmo, to come up with this stuff and regale you with it. But I love how that sounds. I absolutely love how that sounds. It just ties all the little loose threads and weird things about Transformers together in a neat little package. I like it. And speaking of, I glossed over this completely. Like, Megatron can become more powerful than one of the 13. That's another thing worth mentioning, that for all the power scaling and for how many times we've seen Transformers powered up over the years, to realize that it is actually possible for a Transformers to reach a level of divine power, or at least power capable of standing up to like the demigod status of a 13. I don't think that should be ignored either. I am always looking for the middle ground villains, somewhere in between the Megatron that wants to siphon a hydroelectric dam and a Unicron that wants to eat the universe. That's a pretty big gulf I think needs to be filled more often. And if you have threats that reach that level, yeah, I think that does a really nice job of it, right? You have to have something that sits between Frieza and Majin Buu. Where is my Cell? Right? I'm looking for Cell in Transformers. Where is your mid-level villain? If we call Megatron a low-level villain in the grand scheme of everything, and Unicron is your high level, where's the middle? Characters like this that can go beyond even what a 13 is capable of, who are strong enough to stand up to a 13, there's your middle. I need that in Transformers fiction. This opens up a gateway. I want someone to use it. But again, wild fanfic stuff that probably no one else is going to. I doubt any Transformer writers ever going to connect dots like this. But who knows? There are possibilities. And that's kind of what I wanted to do. Just talk the possibilities of, you know, what does it mean that Star Convoy is the 13th Prime? It means a lot. It means a whole lot. And it opens up a lot of areas of fiction that hopefully someone someday may actually tap into. But until then, we can just sit and speculate and have fun talking about it. So for now, thank you everyone for watching. I hope you enjoyed the lunatic raving that was today's video. And as always, I will see you next time.
Analysis complete. Adapting translators to local language.
Are you out there?